Hey everyone, it's Emily with Spiceworks. Thanks for tuning in today and joining us on another Spiceworks Partner Webinar. Beware of network false alarms, how to reduce alert fatigue. Brought to you by VictorOps. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that the webinar will be recorded. So if you have to step away for any reason, you will get an email with a link to the video in about a week. Also, there's a Q&A box on your screen to the left. We encourage you to submit your questions at any time during the presentation. We will get to those questions at the end via a verbal Q&A, but if your question isn't addressed live, VictorOps will be able to follow up with you. So now that all the housekeeping is done, I'd like to introduce our presenters. Mike Merideth, Senior Director of IT, and Jason Hand, DevOps Evangelist. So Jason, whenever you're ready, take it away.
All right, thank you, and thank you to everybody who's joining us this afternoon. We're excited to present on the topic of reducing alert fatigue. This is Jason Hand, and I'm the DevOps Evangelist, and so I'm going to sort of kick off this webinar, and then I'll hand it over here to my colleague Mike Merideth, the Senior Director of IT here at VictorOps. So with that said, let's just go ahead and move forward. So alert fatigue. I thought we'd maybe start off by sort of getting a quick definition of what that means. And it really easily can be defined as just the exposure to high volume of frequent alerts, causing this sort of desensitization, it's a tough word, to critical issues, which of course can lead to a delay in your response time, anxiety within you or your team, and of course that all can also sort of trickle on to problems like sleep deprivation and physical effects, and then of course just this overall sort of dissatisfaction between you and your team. And so all of this just sort of starts to add up on top of each other, and a lot of it's just because of an overwhelming volume of alerts. And so we're going to try to explain a little bit more about that and what we can do to address that. And I've also got in here that people eventually will become sort of numb to these alerts just because there's just too many of them. And of course, when that happens, the alerts themselves just aren't as effective. So how do we identify alert fatigue? Well, one of the best ways that we find is actually just by being very diligent about your reporting when it comes to the monitoring and your alerting. So within the VictorOps platform, we've got several reports that you can run. We've got a mean time to acknowledgement and a mean time to resolution, which shows you some trends in terms of how quickly you're actually able to acknowledge and respond, and then of course resolve your issues. So paying close attention to those reports is going to be a really good indicator as to what's going on. Additionally, on top of those MTTA and MTTR reports, we've got what we call our incident trends. And this helps you sort of keep an eye on an overall view of what types of alerts that are coming in. So reporting is a great way to sort of keep an eye on what's going on with alert fatigue. But reporting is just one easy way, as long as you've got the proper tools for reporting. Another way that you can sort of keep an eye on alert fatigue and identify it is to just basically take the temperature of your team. Just keep your ear to the ground and know what's going on within your company, especially when it comes to sort of the cultural side of your company. And a lot of that can happen in multiple ways. ChatOps is one great example. So in many cases, we find that teams are using tools like HipChat or Slack or IRC to communicate with other team members within their company, and sort of just paying attention to the conversations that are going on within your organization over chat is a great way to sort of see what's going on and make sure you feel like everybody within your team is not being overwhelmed by alerts. On top of that, just general office interactions. We're all working and hustling and trying to put out amazing products, but of course we're also interacting with each other both through digital on a chat platform, but also just sort of mulling around in your office. And it's not too hard for you to ask questions and just see what's going on with your teammates. So just general office interactions is another great way to know what's going on within your team. And then one-on-ones. So in most cases, you're probably having one-on-ones. If you're a manager, you're probably scheduling some sort of regular visit with your team members. If you're, someone more of a junior person, you should have an opportunity to sit down with your manager and or your supervisor and just tell them what's going on and give them more feedback on how you are feeling when it comes to this idea of dealing with alert. And of course, through these interactions, whether it's online through your chat platform, just meeting people in the hallway, or actual sit-downs with your supervisor or your team, you need to look for signs of dissatisfaction. So that shouldn't be too hard. It's just really going to be a matter of being proactive and just sort of having conversations with your team. So why do we have alert fatigue in the first place? Well, the fact is that computing these days, it's just getting cheaper and cheaper. And on top of that, it's easier to automate a lot of your infrastructure and a lot of your deployments, and just sort of automation in general has become a really big topic, especially when you're talking about DevOps. The whole DevOps idea and methodology really encourages us to sort of monitor all the things. It's so easy to keep tabs on all areas of your infrastructure and your code that we're really encouraged these days to, sort of using the DevOps pillars of a culture of automation, measurement, and sharing. We're really, really encouraged to monitor every single thing that we can. And of course, because of that, it's just there is a growing number of things that you're actually monitoring. So because it's becoming cheaper and easier, we're monitoring all these things, and of course that leads to all these additional alerts. So how do we deal with existing fatigue? Well, first of all, I found this great quote by a gentleman named Matthew Green, and he says that your personal life will be interrupted. This is not the ideal situation, but it will happen. You have been warned. And so I think what he's speaking to here is that when you're challenged with being on call and you have to sort of address these alerts and be the one who's responding to these alerts, just sort of go into this responsibility knowing that it's just part of your job. It's part of your responsibility, but you don't have to allow it to be disruptive. And he's got a great blog post. I'm happy to share a link with you to view that later on. But I encourage you to definitely check out. All kinds of articles are available online, but by and large, this is just something that you do sort of have to deal with, but finding ways to deal with it in a productive way and in a healthy way is the smart approach, and that's what we're here to sort of talk to you about. And so with that, I'm going to actually hand it over to Mike, and he's going to go through some very specific ideas on how we can deal with existing fatigue.
Hi, everybody. This is Mike Merideth. I'm the Senior Director of IT here at VictorOps. And we've talked a little bit about how to identify alert fatigue and how to deal with it. But I wanted to talk about some strategies for preventing alert fatigue in the first place. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Use overrides. But for more specific ideas about how to prevent it in the first place, one of my biggest ideas is to have a weekly handoff meeting. Internally at VictorOps, we found the weekly handoff meeting to be a critical factor in reducing our platform errors and improving the on-call experience for everybody. It's a chance for the whole team to catch up on platform trends, because if you haven't been on call, chances are you haven't heard about maybe some errors that showed up from the log files or something like that in the previous night or the previous couple of days. It promotes continual awareness of platform operations, again, for everybody in the whole team, and keeps that operations focus and that operational excellence focus throughout your organization. People from different disciplines can add additional context to the previous week's event. So, maybe your database guy wasn't the one that's on call this week, and so wasn't the person that responded when there was an issue earlier on. But if they're present at the on-call handoff meeting, then they'll be able to add their own context to things that happened earlier in the week. If the sprint process needs to be diverted to respond to scale events or bugs, This is a great place to figure that out. We get attached to our sprint processes, and we want to keep our focus there, but sometimes we need to divert our efforts to deal with something that's happening today in production. So an on-call handoff meeting is a great way for everybody together to realize, hey, we've got a serious problem and there's something that we need to do about it. So what do you do at the actual on-call handoff meeting? One thing that I like to do is to review alert history and reports, as Jason mentioned a little bit earlier. And you want to look for events that came up that really weren't actionable. If something wakes up somebody at 4 o'clock in the morning, but the real answer to that is just to wait, because it's going to fix itself later on in the day, then you really probably don't need to wake up somebody at 4 o'clock in the morning for that. You can also look for thresholds that might be adjusted. Maybe if your disk space gets within 20% available every night, but then it always recovers, maybe you can set the threshold so that it's not going to wake you up every night. You can look for opportunities to use time periods. Like maybe something's going wrong in your staging environment, but maybe you only care about that during business hours when people might be testing against it. So you can use time periods to prevent your alerting platform from telling you about it in the middle of the night. And you can look for redundant alerts. If your database goes down, you definitely want to hear about it, but if you've got 5 different checks that are going to tell you about it at the same time, that's not going to do anybody any good. Make sure that when actionable events come up, people are hearing about it one time, and that way there's a single source of truth for what's going on and one check to look for the recovery on. Another thing you can do at the handoff meeting is to review post-mortem reports for major events that happened during the week. Hopefully, if you have an event that causes a customer-facing outage, you're creating a post-mortem report afterwards so that people can review what happened and look for areas where they can improve the process or improve the product and prevent future outages. This is a great time to go over those. And it's a great time to just let anybody speak up and kind of do a little bit of an operational retrospective. And if anybody's got any concerns about the way things are happening on the platform, this is a great time to bring it up. You may discover gaps in your monitoring, or you may discover places where you're over monitoring. But that last point about gaps in the monitoring is important. You might be missing a piece of early detection that can turn an hour-long recovery into a 5-minute prevention step. So sometimes more monitoring can mean quieter monitoring in the long run. Something else I want to talk about is on-call rotation management. This means thinking about and planning your period and your duration of your on-call shifts, the process for managing your handoff, and decisions about coverage, like how many, whether or not you need 24/7 coverage. A lot of organizations set up a weekly on-call shift and don't spend any more time thinking about it, but depending on your organization, a weekly on-call rotation may or may not be the best fit. For example, if you're a large team and you're getting a lot of alerts, you may find that a weekly on-call rotation is overwhelming, and that the person that's on call winds up having to respond to tens or even hundreds of alerts during a typical on-call shift. Obviously, that's going to lead to burnout. So you might want to consider doing a daily rotation or a follow-the-sun rotation. You should still have on-call handoff meetings, and you should avoid rotation changes on the weekend so that people don't have their weekend disrupted with an on-call shift beginning or ending. If you're a smaller team and you're getting fewer alerts, you may want to think about a weekly or even a bi-weekly rotation. I encourage you to think about handing off in the middle of the week instead of on Monday or on Friday, because that way, if you forget to do a handoff, you don't leave somebody stuck on call for an extra weekend. And also, people tend to be out of the office more on Monday or Friday as they go out for long weekends and vacations. Doing it in the middle of the week means the maximum number of people are there present in the office for the handoff and can contribute to the handoff process. You should definitely be aware of the impact of platform scale when you're working with a small team. If you send out a new release that's going to greatly increase platform utilization and increase alerts, you may want to think about reducing the length of your on-call shift at the same time so you can prevent fatigue. Whatever the team size, you should spend some time thinking about the real-time commitment of an on-call shift. And by that I mean, how many total alerts are you going to receive during that shift, and what's the mean time to resolution of your alerts? If it takes an hour to resolve every issue and you get 40 alerts a week, that means being on call is a full-time job just by itself, and you should look for a way to reduce the burden. You should also be thinking about how much personal recovery time a rotation provides between on-call shifts. You should have 1 week at the very least where somebody doesn't have to be on call and doesn't have to respond to alerts. More is better to a point. You don't want to have, 15 or 20 weeks between on-call schedules, because you might end up kind of losing touch with the operational status of the platform. You should get into the pool more often than that, but not so often that it's a problem. A little bit about rogue IT and over-monitoring. You hear a lot of talk about these days about rogue IT or shadow IT. And one of the side effects of the SaaS movement in DevOps is that if the IT team isn't responsive to user requirements, users typically begin to work around IT and implement things like monitoring on their own. The intention is usually good, but the results can be awful. You can create a cacophony of alerts if something goes wrong, and it's not always obvious where the alerts are coming from, especially if you're not the person that set up the monitoring. That can cause a lot of frustration for on-call team members. So in order to avoid this, you need to establish a process for adding new alerts and alert types, and make sure that everybody in your organization is respecting and sticking to that process. You need to make sure that all of your alert sources are documented, identifiable, and reachable. A monitoring source is no good if only one person has the login in order to shut it up if it's sending out false alarms. You need to apply multiple source monitoring only where it really makes sense. You may want to have your external website watched by 2 or 3 different monitoring systems just to make sure that you're getting geographic coverage and things like that. But an internal system probably doesn't need to be checked from 4 or 5 different places. And it's important that you need to differentiate between performance and functional monitoring, and make sure that you're only sending out alerts for stuff that's really actionable. It's great to know what your performance metrics look like over time, but until you actually have a great handle on what those performance metrics mean in terms of real-world availability, you may not want to alert on all of them. I want to talk a little bit about alert routing too. It's another important concept to think about. The benefit is obvious for large teams with several departments. You can have a different on-call rotation for each functional department. So you might have a person on call for database, and a person on call for your back-end, and a person on call for your front-end website, all at the same time. You can use rules to route alerts straight to the right department. And that means that your back-end engineers don't have to wake up in the middle of the night if you're having clearly a database problem. The people that aren't going to be able to fix the problem can stay asleep and save their energy for things that they can make a contribution. Another idea is that you can combine that with a larger triage rotation. So you might have everybody in the larger department participate in the on-call rotation and know that they're going to route alerts manually to different teams depending on what the alert type is. That can be a way to keep the different disciplines from having a high noise alert stream, but still make sure that you've got coverage and you're getting the right people on the job when you have a problem. Using runbooks can help the triage team solve problems that might have required a specialist in the past. If they can do it themselves, solve it in a few minutes and not have to wake anybody else up, then that's great for the whole organization. Smaller multidisciplinary teams can still make use of alert routing, even if you've only got 4 or 5 people that are on call. One thing to make sure is that you have effective contact methods so that whoever is on call can get the right person if they need help with a specific type of issue. One-person teams can make sense in that context. If you only have one database person, it's okay to have a team that just has that person because it's a place that you can route alerts to. You should be careful of disturbing your specialists unnecessarily if you've got a small team. And again, runbooks is going to be a key thing that you can do to prevent having to wake up people in the middle of the night if something is a relatively minor issue that can be fixed by anybody else. Lastly, one of the biggest things that you can do to reduce alert fatigue is you can expand the pool of people who are going on call. And in the DevOps world, the most obvious answer for that is to put developers on call. It has a lot of benefits for the organization. It promotes empathy among the dev and the ops teams and better product understanding for everybody. People understand what everybody else is doing in their jobs better, and everybody understands the whole picture of how your network works. It promotes the idea that code quality means it runs well in production rather than just the idea of, hey, I passed my unit tests, my code's ready to go. If developers are seeing and interacting with how their code is operating in production on a day-to-day basis, that gives them a whole different perspective on what it means to write good code. It reinforces the value of keeping the alert signal to noise ratio low and can help with the rogue IT and over-monitoring problem, because everybody knows that if they set up an alert, they might be the person receiving that alert some night. And it encourages people to use runbooks to ease the spread of process knowledge, because they know that the more things are captured in runbooks, the less likely they're going to be disturbed in the middle of the night. Of course, not all developers are going to take kindly to the notion of being put on call. You may have an engineer who's 10 years into her career and has never been on call and is not eager to try it out. So one thing that you might do to help ease that pain a little bit is to incentivize on call. You might pay a small bonus to the on-call team member, or it might be a gift card or an extra day off or something like that. It reinforces the value that the company puts on uptime by saying, hey, we're willing to pay a little bit extra if you're willing to help us meet our uptime goals. It won't prevent alert fatigue necessarily, but it may help ease recovery if people know that they've gotten a little bit of reward for the pain that they've had to experience. Lastly, there's other people that might go on call in your organization. Really, anybody who's got a stake in operations and the technical aptitude is a potential candidate for going on call. And that might mean your operations support team, that might mean your QA team, or it might even mean your management team, depending on the organization. You might find that somebody discovers that they have a passion for operations by going on call, and it may make somebody's career new and exciting. You never know. It all depends on your organization, but it's worth talking about. So those are my concepts for preventing alert fatigue: holding on-call handoff meetings, carefully managing your on-call rotation, containing rogue IT and avoiding over-monitoring, routing alerts to the right people, and expanding the on-call pool. I want to thank everybody who tuned in to listen today. You know, at VictorOps, we're very passionate about making on-call suck less, and hopefully some of these tips will help you achieve that dream for your organization. And at this point, we want to open it up to any questions that anybody's got.
What a great presentation. Thanks, Jason and Mike. So we've got a couple questions here. The first one is, you mentioned chat ops. For those not familiar with the concept, can you briefly explain it?
Yeah, so we did mention chat ops earlier. This is Jason, and I had it part of the deck that I was mentioning about. And so chat ops is sort of the idea or the concept of taking the tools that you're using on a day-to-day basis, whether you're in operations or you're a developer, or maybe you're part of the marketing team, or any area of the company, but taking the tools that you're using and injecting those back into your chat client. So there's a lot of different benefits that comes along with chat ops. It kind of helps speed things along a little bit. You're sharing what's going on and what you're doing with other team members. It can certainly help speed up the onboarding process with new hires, because you can immediately bring them into the fold and show them how to do things by them just essentially just learning by watching. So it's sort of like a combination of taking your command line interface that a lot of operations and developers are familiar with and putting that same functionality into a chat client. So chat ops is a great big subject, and I'm actually very passionate and interested in talking more about chat ops. So if you have more specific questions about chat ops, feel free to send me an email, jason@victorops.com, or hit me up on Twitter. I'm @JasonHand. But essentially, it's just a matter of sort of bringing together the idea of the conversations you're having already within your chat client and the actions and types of things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis to not only look at different pieces of your infrastructure and your code and all kinds of aspects from within your company, maybe even querying information about your customers, and bringing that all to the same place where you're already having conversations about that kind of stuff.
Awesome. So we've got another question. What are other tools that can be used for reporting and identifying MTTR?
You know, something that we saw recently that Etsy just released is a tool called Ops Weekly, which is a great way to gather post-mortem reports and alert output in a way that can be reported on and can be reviewed by the whole team. So that's a great tool to look at. Other organizations may just create a shared document like a Google Docs spreadsheet or something like that where they can track information about what alerts are coming in and how they're responding to them. The important thing is that you just have a single source of truth, so a tool that everybody can reach and everybody can contribute to so that no matter where the perspective is coming from, people are able to make their contribution.
And I'll also add that in many cases, the monitoring service that you're using, they will oftentimes have some sort of reporting functionality as well. It may not necessarily give you that same information in terms of your mean time to resolution, but it can at least start to help you identify some trends within your alerting.
Awesome. Well, that's all the questions we have for now. Jason, Mike, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
I'll just say it's been a real pleasure giving this webinar. This is a topic that, of course, VictorOps is very, very interested in solving for a lot of our customers and just a lot of people out there in general, regardless to if you're a VictorOps user. You know, we want to, as we like to say, help make being on call suck less. And so anything that we can do in the efforts of that is something that we definitely want to take a stab at.
And I want to echo that too, and I would be delighted to continue the conversation. If anybody has any follow-up questions, you can reach me at mike@victorops.com or on Twitter at @VO_Mike, and we would love to hear from you.
But one other thing I want to add is towards the end of 2014, we released what we called the State of On Call. And there's a lot of great information. We went out and polled a lot of you on-call professionals and just sort of took a temperature of what's going on within the industry in terms of on-call. And there's a lot of great stats. There's a lot of great quotes. I really encourage you to visit VictorOps.com. There you'll find within our knowledge drop a lot of great content, but that's where the State of On-Call exists. So go check that out whenever you have a moment. And then on top of that, if you're not familiar with VictorOps, please go in and just sign up and see what we're all about. It's free to try out for 14 days. And if 14 days ends up not being long enough, send me an email at jason@victorops.com, and I'm happy to extend your trial. And I'd love to hear your feedback on what you think about the VictorOps platform and what we're doing to help on-call teams. I think that's about it.
Great. What an awesome presentation. Thank you, Mike and Jason. I hope everyone learned a bit more about reducing alert fatigue. I do want to remind you all that if your question wasn't answered live, VictorOps will be able to follow up with you. Also, if you had to step out or missed any part of today's presentation, you will be receiving an email in a few days with a link to view the webinar on demand. Special thanks to VictorOps for sponsoring today's event. Also, thanks to each and every one of you for tuning in today. We hope to see you back soon for another Spiceworks Partner webinar. Until then, stay spicy.